Hello, I'm Hannah Kaplan, and this is the WCS Wild Audio Podcast, where you'll find reported audio stories covering the latest news and newsmakers from the Wildlife Conservation Society's Global Conservation Program, Zoos and Aquarium, and their many partners. We've got a great show today, so let's get to it.
Film archivist Leopold Krist has been steeped in a century's worth of WCS history as he catalogues and digitizes historic archive films documenting conservation work globally and across New York zoos and aquarium. Thanks to funding from the Leon Levy Foundation, which allows WCS to create the Shelby White and Leon Levy WCS Archives Film Initiative, he's preserving footage of everything from studies of biomechanics of crabs to the growth of the Bronx Zoo to polar research expeditions. Hannah Kaplan has the story.
Leopold Krist says that the very practice of moving historical film off the reel every 30 years is critical for its preservation.
One anecdote is people say, it's like, yoga for film. You have to stretch it out. It actually has to move off the reel. It's not like a photograph or a book that can lay on a shelf. It was engineered to move.
For more than a year now, Leopold has been meticulously using a magnifying loupe to review and catalog some of WCS's most important work from the last 100 years, before sending them to be digitized. Most of the footage is recorded in 16mm film, a revolution in filmmaking when it first hit the market in 1924. With it, cameras once only accessible to major film studios became smaller and portable, easily carried to field sites around the world.
A lot of this footage is rare, and a lot of it doesn't really exist in other places. If people want to tell stories about environmental conservation, what this area of the Bronx looked like in the 50s, we have that available right now.
Leopold cites a few of the most memorable films from the collection. One of them is a film called Tomorrow, produced in the 1960s by Bronx Zoo director William Conway.
There they run, free as the wind. This is how we'd all like to see wild animals, and we can, for the New York Zoological Society is seeking funds to make it possible. The drama you see here will thrill you in the zoo of tomorrow.
He wanted zoos to be a tool for education and conservation. But a lot of it was just showing, either through animation or blueprints, the potential for modern day zoos.
We have the space to expand our present African plains. We have surveyed it. We have room to show many more kinds of antelopes, to show our zebras and elephants and hippopotamuses, our giraffes and warthogs and ostriches, all without bars.
He wanted the animals to live in an environment that was similar to their home environment, but he also wanted viewers to take part in that. To be able to articulate that in like a 10-minute film before it's even physically built is pretty amazing.
We are cast in the role of trustees for the wildlife of the future. We face great opportunities and great responsibilities. We are ready for them.
Another example is footage from a study conducted by biologist Jocelyn Crane, showing the comparative evolutionary characteristics of movement in different species of crabs.
With motion picture film, scientists were actually able to study in real time animal movement. And so we have a lot of footage, motion studies of these crabs and how they dig in the sand, and how they kind of compare to each other over different time periods. And there were ways that you could kind of slow them down and study that. A lot of the footage that we have is marked up with grease pencil to show the different edits and cuts. So it's interesting to have that, all of this kind of primary resource material in your hand and seeing the handwriting and seeing, the tools that they used to study different species of wildlife.
As these films span such a long period of time and significant societal changes, they can showcase early 20th century colonialist attitudes in conservation, something that as an archivist, Leopold is mindful of.
As an archivist, it's not so much as like, I'm not going to digitize this material because it's so offensive. It's more like, this takes work for certain ideas that are on the margins to slowly make its way into the mainstream. So I think a lot of our collection could kind of be seen that way, as like, how long does it take for these ideas to kind of come into the mainstream and be accepted? And what was acceptable and what was not acceptable in terms of the treatment of animals, in terms of the treatment of indigenous people, in terms of the environment, in terms of like hunting and the role of safari.
Accessibility is at the heart of what Leopold does, preserving this unique footage so it can be critically appraised by future audiences and used to inform the future.
It's really just like, how can we conserve what we have, make sure that it physically survives, and then artists, historians, filmmakers, they can do what they want with that material. Just have to make sure that they're in a safe home, and that as kind of artifacts, and artifacts that are primary source documents, that they're made accessible.
Leopold feels that his archival work is one of articulating and translating narratives of hope. And while attitudes and approaches have changed, the ultimate drive to conserve the natural world persists.
A lot of times when you work with people in environmental conservation, it's always really about articulating a story or translating.
Take the example of field biologist George Schaller's 1959 to 1960 study of mountain gorillas in Central Africa. This rare footage shows gorillas feeding, playing, and socializing against a backdrop of vibrant green forest, something rarely if ever captured on film before. The very medium of film holds so much power to inspire, visually encapsulating on the screen everything so hard to articulate about our love for the natural world.
Tracking leads to a gorilla group resting and feeding in the deep undergrowth. This young male displays his excitement in the presence of man by slapping the vegetation and shaking his head.
This is not something new. Like, people have been doing these Herculean efforts in order to save species. It can be done. You can see it in real time. We have still photographs, but we also have the moving image story that people made of all of these efforts in order to save this magic that, we find on the earth. So there's just a lot of hope. As an archivist, I try and give people tools to translate this hope.
For WCS Wild Audio, I'm Hannah Kaplan. If you want to check out the full catalog and examples of digitized films, available in spring 2024, visit library.wcs.org. Credit to the Leon Levy Foundation for a Shelby White and Leon Levy WCS Archive Films initiative, which allowed WCS to inventory, assess, and catalog our film collection, and to digitize a portion of it and make it accessible online.
Today's episode was produced and reported by Hannah Kaplan, with help from Dan Rosen and Nat Moss. The WCS Wild Audio Podcast is a production of the Wildlife Conservation Society. Please join us next week for a new episode, and don't forget to follow, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts.